Mayor Cooper, yesterday your office issued a statement to Fox 17 that said, Mayor Cooper and Metro Human Resources have been very clear about the Chief of Police selection process. Our office published the timeline of this process. On July 25th of this year, more than a month prior to your office releasing the, quote, roadmap, the United States Conference of Mayors Police Reform and Racial Justice Working Group, they issued their statement of principles that included trust, legitimacy, community, transparency, and accountability. Now, former Chief Anderson had announced his plans to retire on June 18th. You, Mr. Bunton, Mr. Phillips, or someone on your staff had ample time to review the information. On August 13th, the working group released their recommendations, again, leaving you plenty of time to review these recommendations. After I read the report, I Googled transparent chief of police searches. It took me 10 to 12 minutes to find over a dozen excellent examples of city mayors, city managers, and police departments who are truly committed to a fair and transparent process. A process that included actively seeking out community input from a variety of sources, and then releasing all that information. Other than announcing the roadmap, you made a conscious choice not to release public statements regarding the progress of the process until you announced the committee members. You couldn't even be bothered to publicly release the results of your own online community survey. I asked both Mr. Phillips and Mr. Bunton no less than 5 times if you would commit to a fair, transparent, and impartial police chief selection process, a process that included law enforcement professionals from outside the state of Tennessee, a community oversight board member, frontline advocates from the Black and Latinx community, and an advocate for MMPD victims. It was a simple yes or no question. Not surprisingly, we couldn't get that yes or no answer. What we did get was a non-committal, broken record response saying you and Human Resources were following civil service rules. When we asked you for the civil service rules or policy citations that said the above-mentioned people were ineligible to be on the review committee, our requests were ignored. When we read and reread the rules and policies, we found no such restrictions. Now, since your January promise tracker talked about transparency, and since you said you were elected to, quote, fix problems, you said that yesterday during your press conference, we ask that you fix this problem and be transparent with the residents of Nashville by releasing the civil service rules or policies that clearly prevented Human Resources from including what the overwhelming majority of community respondents said that they wanted on the review committee. And please do it through an immediate media release. Now, last Tuesday, you, Mr. John Bunton, and I, we sat in your office and had what I had hoped would be a frank and honest discussion. During that meeting, you read that the MMPD victims, community members, and partner organizations, what they were requesting as far as the makeup of the review committee and hiring panel for the next chief of police. And the first thing that you read was law enforcement professionals from outside the state of Tennessee. And you said, we've done that. And that was followed by Mr. Bunton saying, That
would include law enforcement members from outside of Tennessee. We've done that.
Please include the name of the outside of the state law enforcement professional who is on the review committee, but somehow was inexplicably excluded from Monday's announcement. And please put that in your press release as well. You continued by saying advocates for the MMPD victims, and I told you then that Silent no longer preferred not to be a part of the committee because we didn't want to appear to be self-serving. You then mentioned advocates from the Black community, from the Hispanic community, and a board member for the Oversight Community Board. And as you read each one of those, I looked directly at Mr. Bunton and mouthed, "They on there?" And each time Mr. Bunton nodded his head up and down, indicating yes.
Member of the Community Oversight Board, an advocate for MNPD employee victims, the Black community, and the Hispanic community for the review for the new hiring.
Both Mr. Phillips and Mr. Bunton, they have emails clearly stating advocates meant frontline, boots on the ground advocates that worked with the community on a daily basis. And on September 15th, we sent Mr. Phillips and Mr. Bunton the press packet that also clearly stated what was being asked and included the community survey responses. You also got those when we had our meeting. Now, Mr. Bunton and you both knew exactly what we were asking for, but you chose to mislead me. In your press release, please explain to the citizens of Nashville why you and Mr. Bunton would choose to make misleading assurances instead of just being honest and transparent.
And I read this letter and it seems it's very fair.
During the meeting, you also said the request a victim made was appropriate, that you could create fairness, and that it was important to get this right.
Most likely, if the mayor said, "I really think this should be done," they probably follow it.
Gotta be fair.
Right.
Gotta be fair.
So,
Okay, this is, I think, important to get right. I can't create justice, but I can create fairness.
Please explain in your press release why your staff said Metro Charter prevented you from asking Interim Chief Drake to grant the victim's request, when in fact Section 201, 203, and 8203 grants you that authority. Please explain why you chose to try to hide behind the charter instead of fixing the problem and creating fairness. While your staff insists you are committed to a fair, impartial, and transparent process, you weren't honest with me. You've thus far chosen not to be transparent throughout this entire process. And you chose not to provide evidence Human Resources, a city department under your authority and control, could not include the people the community requested. And please explain why you chose to allow only current or former city employees on the review committee. That is not a fair or impartial process. If you are indeed a man who can fix problems, and unless you can provide civil service rules that specifically say people outside of Metro government cannot be on a review committee or hiring panel, please show the Nashville community that you can indeed fix those problems and place an outside law enforcement professional, frontline advocates for the Black and Latinx community, an advocate for the MNPD employees, and a board member from the Community Oversight Board on the review committee and on the hiring panel. You don't even need to replace the current members. Simply just add the additional members in order to balance the committee and hopefully help to ensure that it is an impartial process. And I'll provide recommendations for the victim's advocate.